It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. What's up, party people, and welcome back to another episode of NYC Foodways, your weekly food and culture discussion from the cultural capital of the world. My name is John, and this week's episode is dedicated to the life and legacy of Allen Toussaint, musical titan of New Orleans, who blessed us with a vast trove of positive energy. This week on NYC Foodways, we continue our series examining the works of George Orwell, turning the page to the novel 1984, his best and best-known work. This book is so relevant to the interests of this channel that we will be reviewing it in 3 parts: the world of 1984, the language of 1984, and the lessons of 1984. George Orwell died aged 46, leaving behind what one writer describes as a substantial body of work, a growing reputation for greatness, and the conviction that modern man was inadequate to cope with the demands of his history. And it is this history that was the driving force behind the masterpiece known as 1984. Let's take a look at how Orwell came to write it. After fleeing political persecution in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, in June of 1937, Orwell returned in ill health to the deep sleep of England. Due to his various maladies, he was deemed unfit for active duty in the Second World War, but he did eventually join the BBC as a war propagandist in 1941. Orwell began writing 1984 and 1944, and he spent the next 4 years traveling, dealing with his various ailments and writing widely, finishing 1984 in late 1948. It would be published the following June. What resulted is a chilling account of the future that could only have been written by a person willing to be truly honest about the past. The physical world of 1984 has been shaped by a Third World War in which nuclear weapons were widely used. Catastrophic death followed, of course, and the world was eventually divided into 3 spheres of influence: Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia. These areas are ruled by totalitarian superpowers locked in a forever war over disputed territory that is constantly being conquered and reconquered by all parties. Naturally, a world perpetually at war is bound to be a hellish place, but the true hell of 1984 is the manner in which its subjects are controlled in thought and action. The protagonist of 1984, Winston Smith, is one such subject. Winston lives in London and is a low-ranking member of the ruling INGSOC Party, or English Socialism Party, a group led by the semi-mythical figure Big Brother. Winston is employed at the so-called Ministry of Truth, in fact, the party's propaganda department, where he spends his days rewriting history, and I mean that literally, so that the official records reflect whatever reality the party wishes to impose on the populace at a given moment. The mutability of the past is the defining feature of the world of 1984, and its most terrifying feature as well. Do you think this seems absurd? An impossibility? Something pulled from a work of dystopian fiction? On the contrary, Orwell is simply extrapolating tactics Joseph Stalin used following the Great Purge of the 1930s. Bolshevik Party members who had fallen out of favor with Stalin were not only made to disappear in the physical sense through arrest and execution, but many were actually edited out of the historical record, rendered non-existent to begin with. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past, goes the party slogan. That's the party of 1984, mind you. And before you write off this attempted reality control as a long-gone artifact of Red Terror, check this out. In 2002, Ron Suskind, a writer for the New York Times, met with an unnamed senior advisor to President Bush, later revealed to be Karl Rove. Rove was upset with something that Suskind had written and had a bit of feedback on the matter. According to a report by Suskind, and I'm speaking in his voice here, the aide said that guys like me were in what we call the reality-based community, which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. I nodded and murmured something about Enlightenment principles and empiricism. He cut me off. That's not the way the world really works anymore. He continued. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. At one point, Winston meets with a high-ranking Ingsoc Party official who tells him, and let me again stress this book was written between 1944 and 1948, that you believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. It is impossible to see reality except by looking through the eyes of the party. Scary stuff. Orwell, ever the prophet, also presaged the rise of the surveillance apparatus we live under today. Part of the reason the tyrannies of the past were half-hearted and inefficient, Orwell writes, was that in the past, no government had the power to keep its citizens under constant surveillance. The invention of print, however, made it easier to manipulate public opinion, and the film and the radio carried the process further. With the development of the television and the technical advance which made it possible to receive and transmit simultaneously on the same instrument, private life came to an end. Every citizen, or at least every citizen important enough to be worth watching, could be kept for 24 hours a day under the eyes of the police and in the sound of official propaganda. In the world of 1984, this is brought to life with the government-mandated telescreen, found in nearly every room in every building in London. The telescreen is a monitor in the truest sense of the word, in that it is monitored 24 hours a day and both transmits and receives data at all times. Seem crazy? An impossibility? In March of 2012, Wired magazine broke the story on the U.S. government's Utah data center. In the article, this innocuous-sounding series of buildings is vaguely explained by some loser government sellout as a state-of-the-art facility designed to support the intelligence community in its mission to, in turn, enable and protect the nation's cybersecurity. In fact, the Utah data center was constructed as a centralized cloud facility for the NSA's numerous eavesdropping tentacles. Its computing power is so vast, and its post-9/11 intelligence gathering power is so opaque that, according to the heroic genius William Binney, a former NSA employee who helped automate the NSA's spying network before blowing the whistle on the project, you can watch everybody all the time with data mining. Everything a person does becomes charted on a graph, financial transactions or travel or anything, he says. The Wired article alleges that flowing through its servers and routers and stored in near bottomless databases will be all forms of communication, including the complete contents of private emails, cell phone calls, and Google searches, as well as all sorts of personal data trails, parking receipts, travel itineraries, bookstore purchases, and other digital pocket litter. It is, in some measure, the realization of the Total Information Awareness Program created during the first term of the Bush administration. The future, it would seem, is now. The world of 1984 is a world unmoored from time, from history, from reality, a war-torn land of deprivation and lack, of total and complete government control, a Fukuyaman dream, one where history has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present where the party is always right. A world where hate replaces love in every possible instance, where the enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil, and it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. Despite the fact that Oceania's military allegiances were constantly shifting between East Asia and Eurasia, just as the Allies' allegiance with Stalin and Stalin's allegiance with Hitler had shifted on a dime during the Second World War. The world of 1984 is terrifying for many reasons, doubly so because the terror is not invented, only grafted from, or the expansion of, terror Orwell himself witnessed in Spain and during the Second World War. The Stalinist purges, the genocide, the rationing, the snitching, the lies, the propaganda, the murderous cult of personality, the show trials, the torture. 1984 is a world of cognitive dissonance as ideology. Every pleasure we take for granted today has been abolished in the world of 1984. According to the rules of the party, even our own thoughts are not our own. Everyday items, at least what you and I would consider everyday items, a paperweight, a diary, a book, take on totemic significance in a world drained of sentimentality, a world without feeling, a world where the past had not merely been altered, it had actually been destroyed. A world where war is no longer the desperate, annihilating struggle that it was in the early decades of the 20th century. It is a warfare of limited aims between combatants who are unable to destroy another, have no material cause for fighting, and are not divided by any genuine ideological difference. The fighting, when there is any, takes place on the vague frontiers whose whereabouts the average man can only guess at. 1984 is, in the opinion of this channel, the defining book of the second half of the 20th century. Orwell was very, very ill when he wrote it, and would leave this world less than a year after its publication. I don't know if he knew that his end was nigh, but there is not a word wasted in this book, an unnecessary phrase or extra clause. The prose unspools with the urgency of a man near death, who wishes desperately to get all he knows onto the page before the bell tolls for him, with a goal of nothing less than saving the world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for another episode of NYC Foodways. Peace.